Okay, we're going to do a second part of the bones of the skull, and the next one we're going to do is the mandible. And so the mandible, pretty easy. Most of you probably called it your jaw, or perhaps your lower jaw. We see it here, and obviously here. Okay. This is another case where we had two bones in the fetus and one in the adult. In fact, I'll get a fetal mandible over here. You can see right here that there's a split between the two pieces, and we'll take a look at some of the features of the fetal mandible in a bit. We have the maxilla. Now the maxillary bone in this skull is orange, and if you just look at the anterior portion of the face, it doesn't look like it's very large. But then if you look into the orbit, you see that it extends back and makes up the floor of the orbit, a large portion of it anyway. And then you also see that if you look into the pharyngeal region, it makes up a huge portion of the hard palate. About 75 or 80% of the hard palate is maxillary bone. If we look at that in the white skull, here it is, a part of the face. It makes up that inferior portion of the orbit. And then you can't really see the suture very well here, but the break between the maxillary bone and the palatine bone is right about there. So this is the maxillary bone. By the way, not everyone has to screw and sort it into their maxillary bone. That's an option that you have to pay for extra at the birth. Okay, we have nasal bones. Nasal bones are, one other thing about the maxillary. I actually have two separate maxillary bones here. So, let's see. Oh, wrong one. Yikes. Gotta be keeping your wits about you. There we go. Okay. So they go together like this. Okay. And you can see it's sort of C-shaped like this. Makes like a C. So this top part of the C would be the orbit, and the inferior portion of the C would be the hard palate, and then the vertical part is your face. Okay. We have the nasal bones. Nasal bones are like coffee with a lot of half and half in it right here. One on each side. There are two of them. And on the white skull, you can see the nasal bones right here. Okay. Then we have the occipital bone in this skull. The occipital bone is light blue, and it's one bone, so it's very large. And actually, this skull was modeled after a real skull, and you can see there's an extra suture right here. And this suggests that this person probably was of Asian heritage. A lot of people with Asian heritage have this extra bone. The white skull, we'll see the occipital bone comes up here. There's very little of it in that skull cap. A little bit, but not too much. Put that on. Yikes. Oop. Good thing I'm not a juggler. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, here's the occipital. Okay. Lambdoidal suture. And there's some structures on the occipital we'll talk about. It extends to the inferior portion of the skull, articulates with the atlas right here. Okay, next we have the palatine bone. Palatine bone is sort of a red raspberry sorbet color. You can see it right here. It makes up part of the hard palate. That would be the horizontal plate of the palatine. There also is a piece of the palatine that goes vertically on the lateral sides of the nasal cavity, and that's called the perpendicular plate of the palatine. You will not be responsible for that because it's very difficult to tell exactly where it is. So in this skull, this is the palatine here, and then there's a piece extending up on either side of the nasal cavity. Next we have parietal bones, and this is a multicultural skull, so you can see this is the Irish portion. We have a parietal on either side, and they're separated by a sagittal suture. Okay. And they're big, but they don't have a lot of landmarks on them that we're going to study. Here are the parietal bones here, one on either side. Sagittal suture coming here. This is the frontal bone out here. This is the coronal suture separating the parietal from the frontal. We have the sphenoid, and the sphenoid is sort of like horse manure. It's everywhere. In the colored skull, it's red. So if you look into the orbit, You can see this sphenoid back here. If you look at the side of the skull, it's just anterior to the temporal bone. That's red. If you look into the cranium, see this is all sphenoid. If you look into the pharyngeal region, you can see these are the pterygoid processes of the sphenoid bone. It touches almost all of the bones in the skull. Not quite, but a large number of them. Okay, the sphenoid bone on this one. So we have this is the lesser wing of the sphenoid right here, makes up part of the anterior fossa. Greater wing of the sphenoid, I'm going to rotate this around, goes right up in there on either side. This is the greater wing of the sphenoid here also. And then we have the pterygoid processes of the sphenoid bone here.